My name is Thea and I am 31 years old. I spent 14 months carefully planning my wedding on a budget I created entirely myself. I worked extra shifts waiting tables on weekends and took on freelance graphic design jobs late at night so I wouldn't have to ask my parents for even $1. I wanted this day to belong completely to me, free from the favoritism that had defined every family event since I was a teenager. Yet even that modest hope was shattered just 3 days before I walked down the aisle. My mother sent me a text that I read while sitting on the bathroom floor still wearing my wedding dress during the final fitting. The words are etched into my memory. She wrote that my brother Desmond's business trip to Singapore was more important than what she referred to as my small celebration. She said she and my father had already reserved flights to see him off at the airport instead of coming to my ceremony. I stared at that message for nearly 10 minutes, hoping for any follow-up, a joke, an apology, or anything that might ease the pain. Nothing arrived. My father, who had promised for more than a year that he would walk me down the aisle, simply replied with a thumbs-up emoji to my mother's message, as though that resolved everything. Growing up, I had always been the quiet achiever who went unnoticed. Desmond received the trophies displayed proudly on the mantle, the college fund that never ran out, and constant praise for ordinary accomplishments. I earned a scholarship to a state university completely on my own, yet my mother's only response was to ask why I hadn't tried for a school with a more impressive reputation. I learned early that competing for their attention was useless, so I stopped trying and created a life that did not rely on their approval. I met my fiancé, Rowan, 2 years ago in a pottery class I joined on impulse. From our very first conversation, he made me feel like the most fascinating person in the room. He proposed on a hiking trail we had walked many times before, at the exact spot where we first talked seriously about what we both wanted from life. Planning the wedding together with him was the first time I truly felt like a priority to someone, which made my parents' message hurt even more deeply. By the morning of the wedding, my parents were already boarding a plane to Singapore. I learned this through a photo my aunt sent me, showing my mother and father smiling in an airport lounge with my brother standing between them, holding a boarding pass like a trophy. I had exactly 4 hours left before the ceremony and no one to walk me down the aisle. My coordinator, a calm and composed woman named O'Dalys, noticed that I had turned pale while reading the photo and asked what had happened. When I explained the situation, she didn't offer sympathy. Instead, she offered a practical solution. She mentioned that the venue's landscape architect, a widower named Julian Thorne who had been supervising the garden restoration for the past 3 weeks during our final preparations, had commented several times on how impressive my planning was, and how unusual it was to see a bride manage every detail herself without complaining. O'Dalys asked if I would like her to check whether he would be willing to step in. I laughed at first, thinking the idea was ridiculous, agreeing to let someone I barely knew walk me down the aisle at my own wedding. But desperation and dignity sometimes work together, and within the hour I was sitting across from Julian in the venue's greenhouse, watching him listen to my story with a seriousness that caught me off guard. He agreed without hesitation. He told me that family is not defined only by blood and that he would be honored to do it. Walking down that aisle on the arm of a man I had known for just 3 weeks was not the moment I had imagined a year earlier, but it became something deeper and more meaningful. I smiled the entire way, not the rehearsed smile brides practice for photos, but a real one, because for the first time in years I felt surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to be there. My best friend recorded the entire walk on video, intending to post it as a simple wedding highlight for our close friends. Neither of us expected what happened next. By Monday morning, that clip had reached more than 1 million views. Comments poured in from strangers who understood the full story from the caption alone. People described it as one of the most quietly heartbreaking and beautiful moments they had seen in months. My phone kept vibrating nonstop. My mother called 61 times throughout that single day. Each voicemail grew more desperate than the last, until the final one delivered information that changed everything. Her voice trembled as she said that my father's boss had seen the video spreading online. He had immediately recognized the man walking me down the aisle and needed to speak with my father in his office first thing in the morning, because he knew exactly who Julian Thorne truly was. My mother's last voicemail rambled before reaching the main point, but once she connected Julian Thorne's name with my father's boss, I sat up and listened to it 3 more times to make sure I understood correctly. It turned out that Julian was not just a temporary landscape architect hired by the venue for a restoration project. He was the founder of Thorne Horticultural Group, a company that had quietly secured 3 of the largest commercial landscaping contracts in the state, including the multi-year agreement for the corporate campus, where my father had worked for the past 11 years. My father's boss, a man named Gerald Whitcomb, sat on the board that had personally approved that contract renewal only a few months earlier. He had met Julian face to face during the signing. When the wedding video reached him through a colleague who shared it on social media, he did not need any explanation or captions. He instantly recognized the man in the navy suit, standing in for a father who had chosen to miss his own daughter's wedding. The image of one of the company's most important business partners doing what the real father had refused to do was not something he could ignore. Gerald called my father into his office first thing Monday morning. According to my father's own shaken account later that week, the meeting was harsh. Gerald asked directly why a respected business partner had been standing in for him at his daughter's wedding. My father, completely unprepared, tried to offer an excuse about a family emergency involving my brother. Gerald reportedly interrupted him and said he did not appreciate being lied to. He added that it was difficult to trust the judgment of a man who would willingly abandon his own child for something as insignificant as seeing someone off at an airport. My father's position at the company had never been completely secure, and this incident gave leadership the reason they needed to push him aside from the promotion he had been pursuing for more than a year. I did not feel victorious when I heard this. I only felt a strange, empty sense of confirmation that the people I had spent my whole life trying to please had built their world on the same conditional love they had always shown me. Now that world was cracking under its own pressure. My mother's calls continued even after that first day. She left message after message demanding that I publicly explain the situation, post something that would clarify it was all a misunderstanding, that of course they loved me, that Desmond's trip had been unavoidable, and that I was exaggerating everything. I let every call go to voicemail for 4 full days while Rowan and I were on our honeymoon in the mountains, finally free from the noise and able to breathe. When I eventually called her back, I kept my voice steady and told her I was not interested in protecting her image or fixing what she and my father had chosen to do. I explained that choosing Desmond's departure over my wedding was not a misunderstanding, it was a choice, and choices carry consequences whether or not the internet notices them. She cried, she argued, and she listed every sacrifice she claimed to have made while raising me. I listened until she finished, then calmly replied that I hoped she and Dad could repair the damage at his job, but that it no longer had anything to do with me. Julian and I remained in contact after the wedding, and what began as a simple favor between near strangers grew into a genuine friendship that neither of us had anticipated. He told me once, over coffee a few weeks later, that he had lost his own daughter in a car accident 6 years earlier. Walking me down the aisle had given him something he believed he would never experience again, the quiet honor of standing beside someone on the most important day of her life. He said that witnessing my parents' absence in person had angered him in a way he hadn't expected, because he knew from personal experience what it meant to lose the opportunity to walk a daughter down the aisle. He could not comprehend 2 people willingly giving that chance away. Rowan and I began inviting him to dinner regularly, and he gradually became a steady part of our lives, the kind of reliable presence my own parents had never been able to provide. My brother Desmond reached out months later. He seemed uncomfortable and apologetic, saying he had never asked our parents to miss my wedding and had felt terrible when he learned what they had done in his name. I believed him, and over time we started rebuilding a relationship separate from our parents' issues, one that no longer required us to compete for their limited attention. Looking back, I would not change a single detail of that day, even the parts that broke my heart at the time. Everything that followed taught me more about who truly shows up for others than 30 years of trying to earn my parents' approval ever could. If this story touched you even a little, and if you have ever had to create your own family from the people who actually show up, please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. There are many more stories like this one still to come, and I would love for you to be here for every single one of them.